Okay, we are back with SABRETOOTH WAR. My bad, y'all. I kind of fell behind and forgot about it for a little bit. But in the last video that we did, SABRETOOTH killed the son of Wolverine. And Wolverine responds exactly the way you think he would. He was pissed, like he is so incensed, and immediately starts going after SABRETOOTH and all his forces. Now, one of the things to remember, and it's what we covered in the last video, it's not just SABRETOOTH anymore, that it's SABRETOOTH and the different versions of himself that he's gathered from across the multiverse. Most of these just had their heads lopped off and they've basically just mindless robots. All that was done at the hands of the son of SABRETOOTH, Graydon Creed. Most likely he will appear later on in this series. So we'll kind of hold off an explanation for his character until then, although we do briefly run over him in the first video. But the important thing is Wolverine slashing and tearing everything up. And he's like a hair's breadth away from going into a berserker rage, which is when he just like loses all semblance of self-control and just becomes this mindless beast. And SABRETOOTH is actually kind of pushing him towards it, right? Like the whole time that Wolverine's screaming and carrying on, SABRETOOTH's just like, the pain you're feeling is just gonna get worse now when you realize you can't do nothing about it. When you realize you can't stop us from killing every last one of the team holed up inside your little snow fort. And so what SABRETOOTH does is he presents what are in effect the traditional carbonadium tentacles of Omega Red, but in a different reality, they were actually made of adamantium. And so this is effectively just like adamantium ropes. They string Wolverine up and he has no conceivable way of cutting through these ropes in order to get himself loose, although he actually will in a pretty gruesome way. But one of the things that happens is one of the other SABRETOOTHs challenges the main SABRETOOTH. And that's one of the big things to understand. SABRETOOTH in Marvel Comics is one of the reasons why I love this so much. This guy is just pure chaos, right? Just a mindless beast wreaking havoc around everything that he finds. But over the course of Marvel, what they've kind of established is that like of all the different versions of SABRETOOTH in the multiverse, the one from the main Marvel universe is like the most sadistic and most capable one. And so that's why all these other guys, even though they go to challenge him, none of them can really hold a candle against him. And so what you do is you pick up with quote unquote Wolverine entering into the habitat to meet with the rest of X-Force. And he immediately knocks out Domino, which is the smartest move. And then of course, Laura Kinney, sniffing the air, realizes it's not actually Wolverine, but she doesn't know exactly who this guy is. Now, once he changes form, of course, we realize it's the SABRETOOTH from an alternate reality who can shapeshift and look like virtually anybody. Not only that, it's the fact that he can smell like that person. Hence the reason why X-23 was not able to immediately figure out that it wasn't Wolverine. Now, of course, following that, like you get this really cool moment where she takes this guy out and she's like, okay, like you're not Victor Creed, but you're a Victor Creed. And so she's like, how many of you are there? And he says, so many, and they all just come pouring in. Now at that moment, you switch over to Black Tom Cassidy and to Sage. Now these two are kind of like the eyes and ears of the habitat. They're supposed to be the security system. Sage can basically hack any computer system in the world. She uses satellites to see everything going on around them. And Black Tom Cassidy can control plants, which are basically kind of like these tentacles that he has running under the snow, which kind of are like an early alert system in case anybody's moving in their direction. But they were basically taken out because at the beginning of this story, SABRETOOTH killed Quentin Quire, an Omega level telepath, and then literally put his head in a box. And we'll find out how far reaching that goes here in a little bit. But what it did is it allowed SABRETOOTH to use the telepathic abilities of Quentin Quire to effectively shut down Sage and Black Tom Cassidy. They are essentially in like catatonic states, but really more like a telepathic holding state, if you want to call it that. Following that, SABRETOOTH immediately beelines for Colossus. And because Peter's just like laying there in his normal human form, this guy's immediately attacked by SABRETOOTH and seemingly like taken out, even though he tries to turn into his osmium metal form. All the while, Wolverine is just kind of there, strung up, knowing there's nothing he can do and just struggling with it all. Following that, like, Sabretooth and his guys go after all the mutants that are there that have basically been rescued by like Wolverine and his forces, and they slaughter them all. It is absolutely merciless. And as gruesome as this is, man, this is old school Sabretooth. This is Sabretooth from like the 1980s. That's really what this is. It's amazing to see that this version of his character has come back. This guy took no prisoners back in the day, and that's exactly what it is here. If you manage to make your way out of here, it's because you just flee. And in fact, that's what happens. You have Aurora and you have Northstar who grab a couple of mutants and just bail out of there as fast as they possibly can. Now, their idea is to fight and to do what they can, and they end up tracking down Sage and they track down Black Tom Cassidy. They take out these like mindless one versions of Sabretooth, and then they use their abilities to basically free Black Tom Cassidy and Sage of the telepathic control. Now, these two are kind of cool. They're by no means the most powerful mutants who were out there, but they're kind of unique, right? They're basically twins. And between the two of them, they can let off this kind of calming light, or really various forms of light, but the calming light allows them to basically break telepathic control over other people. So I wouldn't go as so far as to say like they're a main X-Men team, right? Like you definitely want them on the main team, but like you'd want them on the reserves, right? Like Team B, right? If you want to call it that. So again, they're not as crappy as Black Bolt and the Inhumans, but they are really, really interesting. And so Wolverine sitting here comes to the realization he's got to get free somehow. This guy pops his claws and says like, sure, I can't cut these adamantium tentacles and my bones are laced with adamantium, but guess what my claws can cut through? My own skin. Now, here's the weird thing about that. Technically, he shouldn't be able to, right? Because adamantium cannot cut through adamantium, or at least true adamantium cannot cut through true adamantium. It's just not gonna happen. And so technically he shouldn't be able to free himself, but it's comic book logic, he ultimately does. So switching back over to Laura Kinney, this chick's holding her own. And I gotta say, man, I'm kind of excited to see that they're doing this with her character, because X-23, probably over the last couple of years in Marvel Comics, has just kind of like been there, and you haven't really seen her as like the old school X-23 who just really knows how to just tear into people. It is cool to see her in a position where she can just cut loose, because unlike Wolverine, who goes into a berserker rage and kind of loses his mind, X-23, she's always looking for a reason to be pissed off. She's like people on Twitter. She doesn't know what to do if she's not angry. And so it's one of those cool things, because you get to see her just completely and totally cut loose. And in fact, she takes out one of these Sabretooths and like removes his head from his body, which is pretty nuts. But ultimately, she's captured by all the other Sabretooths who were there. Now, because of the fact that Black Tom Cassidy and Sage are freed, they're able to use the kind of security system that they've built in order to start like attacking everybody. So Colossus does make it out in one piece. At least this guy's in his osmium metal form. And so these Sabretooths are trying to do what they can where they can, but let's be honest, man, these guys are not going to be able to take out Colossus. And in return, the main Sabretooth, realizing what's going on, says, everybody fall back. They snatch up X-23 and they bail, but Wolverine gets there just in time for them to be gone, because this guy's got his claws popped. He has no hands, so it's kind of gruesome to see, but it looks amazing at the same time. I absolutely love it. But once he gets in there, he realizes Laura's gone. Now, the kicker about all this is Laura's not technically the daughter of Wolverine. She's more based off Wolverine's DNA, kind of like a clone to a degree. Wolverine still kind of treats her as his child because she was made in the model of him. And in fact, in a lot of ways, in the Craig Kyle Chris Yoss stories, when you saw the adaptation of Laura from like X-Men Evolution into the comics, that Wolverine took her under his wing and kind of taught her how to be normal, right? How to stop being feral. But the fact remains, she's gone and he has no idea what happened to her. But because of the fact that Sabretooth always does stuff like this on Wolverine's birthday, ultimately he assumes that she's dead. And so what you do is pick up with this kind of a flashback switching to the modern day, where you get this really cool instance of Sabretooth talking. And he says, people talk about the good old days. Nostalgia is one hell of a drug. I'm immune to every narcotic there is, except maybe that one. Nicaragua years back, just another routine Team X delivery. That was what it was supposed to be. I can still smell all the spilled blood and nitroglycerin. good times, right? And then he says, sometimes you don't know what you've got until it's gone. I thought a crew of Creeds would be the greatest team of all time, but it turns out I'm an idiot, right? So the thing to know about Sabretooth is with Team X, yes, they were a wet work team, which usually meant that their missions involved like pretty gruesome stuff. But unlike Wolverine or Maverick or Mastodon or Kestrel or Silver Fox, Sabretooth actually loved it, right? He just found this immense amount of satisfaction in taking out all these different individuals for whatever reason they'd been assigned to them. He was just bloodlusted. And so it's one of the things that was always a hallmark of his character, just this guy that has this insatiable drive to just kill. That's all he really wants to do. More so than that, you have another one of these Sabretooths that challenges the main Sabretooth himself, but he's proved himself dominant before, and he does the same thing here. But what this establishes to Laura, who's watching all of this, is that they're not a unified force. It's not one of these things where they're all working together, they all share the same vision, and they come back after a kind of momentary defeat, they regroup, and they figure out a plan. No, it's a tenuous alliance at best. And so they start to question Victor because some of their own had been killed back there. Some of those guys had died, and so they're not so sure that Victor is as capable as he's led them to believe, which to a degree is kind of true. Victor's been around for quite some time, and he's served on Team X, and he's been a mercenary and done all kinds of stuff and worked for all kinds of people. But is this guy like Captain America level military strategy? No. Never in a million years. That's never going to happen. So oftentimes, one of the things Sabretooth does is he tricks people into believing he's more capable than he is in order to get them to ally to his side, which again is exactly what they did here. But switching over to everything with Quentin Quire, once Sabretooth gets back into his quarters, that's when you realize the full extent of what's going on. Quentin Quire is basically without a body, but Orcus, the anti-mutant organization, had developed technology to where they were able to basically use the heads of mutants for their own ends, basically keeping the brain alive and keeping it fully functional. And so one of the reasons why this was done is he says, technically speaking, you're dead, but Orcus was experimenting with ways to make use of mutant components. It's sick stuff. I love it. And he says, imagine going into war with Cyclops' head mounted on your tank. Unleash those eye blasts with the push of a button, and the tech itself limits your autonomy. Wouldn't want Cyclops blasting your team in a fit of independence. I've had time to learn how it works. You're my beta test. Now answer my questions. And so it's a way for him to use the mind of one of the most powerful telepaths in the world for his own ends. Now, the fact that he's only using it to focus on Wolverine just shows how hyper-focused Sabretooth is on just like taking away everything Wolverine cares about, but it also shows how small-minded he is, right? He doesn't really think big. He just thinks small, right? He thinks in the moment. And so he asked Quentin the question, you can read his mind, Quentin, is he going to bring the troops or come by himself? The response of Quentin, he'll come alone. He won't want to risk anybody else. Then he asked the question, does he know we kidnapped his daughter yet? The response of Quentin, affirmative. And he says, and how's he taking it? Quentin's response, he's suffering, he's enraged, incensed, apologetic, wrathful. What that means is Wolverine is on the verge of a berserker state. And that's really what Sabretooth is trying to push him into. If I'm being honest, that's exactly what it looks like. He's trying to push him into a berserker rage so he can destroy Wolverine at his absolute strongest point. Again, the biggest part of this for Sabretooth is taking out the ones that Wolverine cares about. That was the whole idea behind like the birthday presents, right? Like every year on his birthday, Sabretooth kills the person closest to Wolverine. Now he's going after everybody, right? All bets are off. And so Sabretooth basically tells Quentin, I want you to keep an eye out. If anybody comes to my door, I want to be alerted, right? Because, you know, telepathy, you can read everybody's minds and all that kind of stuff. But what Quentin does is he sends off a kind of alert system. And this actually ends up going to the Exiles. Now, here's the thing about this. The Exiles team, as it exists now, is not really the traditional Exiles team, which is to say a team of mutants from different realities who have been pulled together by a singular force to deal with problems across the multiverse. This Exiles team is largely composed of the mutants that we saw in the original Sabretooth story. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar with that, you'll find a link to the playlist that has all the Sabretooth stuff so you can kind of get caught up. But the long and short is that at the very beginning of House and Powers of X, Sabretooth was thrown into the pit, which was like the prison inside Krakoa, but he was able to reshape it and modify it and turn it into like his own personal landscape, right? He was able to literally become God in that place. Eventually, these other mutants that now make up the Exiles were thrown in there as well. But Sabretooth, ever the sadist, just started putting them through all these horrible and horrendous experiments, basically like turning them inside out, tormenting them, torturing them, that kind of thing. And so once Sabretooth escaped, they kind of went after him and they were trying to find a way to stop him, but ultimately he ended up getting away. And so they ended up coming back here and have basically been dealing with the fallout from the fall of the House of X, right? The collapse of the mutant population, the end times as far as every mutant on Earth is concerned. But with this alert from Quentin Quire, now they're being told Sabretooth is back here on Earth, and here's where he's at. But understand here, despite everything they're discussing, right, Third Eye showing them like, this is the kind of stuff Sabretooth has done right now. He killed Quentin Quire, different things like that, because Third Eye has the ability to basically create mental projections. He can tap into like astral projection, leave his body, different things like that. He's basically a psychic, right? Like, despite all of their vaunted abilities, the reality here is they're scared of Sabretooth, and rightfully so, because Sabretooth, when all bets are off, when there is nothing holding him back, when it's no holds barred, he's one of the most dangerous people that you're ever going to meet in the Marvel Universe. Because imagine just a version of Wolverine who's sadistic and twisted and evil, wants nothing but to kill people, and has a healing factor to boot. How do you easily defeat a guy like that? It's the reason why the X-Men locked him away in the pit in the first place. Plus, there were also some shady things that went on here. But switching back to Laura Kinney, she has this really cool moment where she starts taunting the other members of the Sabretooth that are there. Because one of the things to know about Laura is she is hardcore trained in warfare. And when I say trained, I mean she's trained in mental warfare. She's trained in using people's emotions against them. She's trained in traditional combat tactics. She knows how to fight on multiple levels. So facing off against X-23 is not just fighting a girl with some claws that comes out of her hands and her feet. It's fighting a woman that will fight you in multiple ways at the same time. And that's why she taunts them, right? Like, are you guys clones? Like, there's no shame in that. Like, I used to think that I was a clone, and where the woman's just like, you know, nobody asked for your life story. She's like, so different dimensions, right? That's it. You guys are from different dimensions. So you guys were the betas in your dimension too, because obviously that other Sabretooth, like our Sabretooth, is way more capable than you. So just kind of taunting them. And where it does piss off the shape-shifting Sabretooth, at the end of the day, it does not really piss off this woman. And in fact, she goes so far as to basically emit a gas inside the holding cell that was developed by Orcus that would neutralize the healing factor of X-23. This woman goes in there and tears her apart. And in fact, she rips her jaw off of her face, like off of Laura's face. She takes her tongue out of her mouth and she's just like, it's gonna take you a little while to heal from that, and just walks away. But what she does say is, Laura's right. And having this conversation, she's like, Laura's right. You know, we're considered the betas. We're not considered as capable as Sabretooth. The reality is, like, some of our kin, even though they're from other dimensions, have died under this guy's leadership. This guy's not an effective leader. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into the multiverse. We're gonna get his son Graydon, who literally specializes in killing Sabretooth, and we're gonna bring him here. But you're not gonna tell anybody, and I'm not gonna tell anybody, and this is gonna be our little secret. And so in the midst of all this, you get back to Sabretooth, who has this really cool monologue where he says, war is truth, war is love. I was truly myself back then, and so was he. Everyone else might buy his noble warrior routine, but if that's what he wants to be, why is he so damn sad all the time? It's because he misses what we used to be together. Breaking him down, getting back to the real Logan, I'm doing him a favor. If he can't change, he'd be better off dead. So again, the old school, hyper-violent, berserker rage Logan, that's the person that Sabretooth is trying to draw out. And maybe there's some part of him where he feels like he's doing it for altruistic reasons. He's actually making Wolverine back into the person that he used to be, which, truth to tell, man, I would kind of welcome that. Because I'll be honest with you guys, Wolverine's cool, right? He's been interesting in recent years. I miss the old 1980s Wolverine, man. Just like the hyper-violent guy. He'd pop his claws, tear an enemy to shreds, and be home in time for cornflakes. That's the dude I miss. And so what happens is Sabretooth is woken up by Quentin Quire, who seems like he's talking in his sleep, right? Better off dead, there's a way. Quiet boy, loose lips sink ships. So seemingly, he's kind of just talking to himself based on what he's hearing from the mind of Sabretooth. And Sabretooth says it's like he's talking in his sleep. Didn't know the dead could dream. It sounds like he's trying to keep a secret, but what is it? And what Sabretooth does is he approaches where Quentin Quire is at. He sees this kind of treasure map that pops up, and he's just like, I know exactly where that is. And he's like, we're going hunting. Now, where it is that he gets to or where this leads him to, I'm not entirely sure. One part of me wants to say it's the Exiles, but one part of me also wants to say it's something far more interesting than that. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. If you guys need to get caught up on everything related to Sabretooth, make sure you click this link to the video, and I will catch you all later. Peace.